Have you ever stood in your backyard at night, looking up at the stars, and felt this strange sense that you're being watched? Not by aliens or ghosts, but by time itself. By the weight of billions of years pressing down on this moment, whispering a question we've never dared to ask out loud. What if we're not the first ones to stand here and wonder? Tonight, we're going to explore an idea so mind-bending it could shatter everything you thought you knew about Earth's history. An idea that scientists whisper about in conferences but rarely discuss in public? What if humans aren't the first intelligent species to call this planet home? I know what you're thinking. This sounds like science fiction, like something out of a movie where archaeologists discover ancient alien technology buried beneath the pyramids. But here's the thing. This isn't about little green men or flying saucers. This is about something far stranger and far more unsettling. This is about the possibility that intelligence has risen on Earth before, perhaps multiple times, and vanished so completely that we forgot it ever existed. My name is Alex, and over the past 6 months, I've been diving deep into one of the most fascinating questions in science. A question that combines geology, paleontology, archaeology, and a healthy dose of intellectual humility. By the end of this series, you'll never look at a fossil, a rock formation, or even your own reflection the same way again. But before we go any further, let me blow your mind with a simple fact. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Modern humans have existed for roughly 300,000 years. If you compressed Earth's entire history into a single year, humans wouldn't show up until the very last hour of December 31st. Everything we call civilization, everything we've built, every story we've told would happen in the final few minutes before midnight. So here's the uncomfortable question that keeps me awake at night. What happened during all those other hours? All those other days and months and seasons of Earth's year? Were they empty? Lifeless? Just bacteria and simple organisms waiting around for us to finally show up and make things interesting? Or is it possible that in those vast stretches of time, something else awakened? Something that looked at the world with curious eyes, asked questions about the stars, and maybe even built things we can no longer recognize? This idea has a name in scientific circles. It's called the Silurian Hypothesis, named after a fictional ancient reptilian species from Doctor Who. But the concept behind it is very real, and it's being taken seriously by researchers who study deep time and planetary evolution. The hypothesis asks a deceptively simple question. If an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years before humans, would we be able to detect it today? And the answer, as we'll discover, is far from certain. Think about this for a moment. We assume that if something intelligent lived before us, we'd find their cities, their tools, their bones scattered across the landscape like breadcrumbs leading back through time. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if intelligence doesn't always leave the kind of traces we expect? Let me paint you a picture. Imagine a civilization that existed 50 million years ago. Not necessarily like ours, not necessarily even recognizable to us, but intelligent nonetheless. They developed language, culture, perhaps even technology. They thrived for thousands, maybe millions of years. And then, for reasons we'll never know, they disappeared. what would be left of them today after 50 million years of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, erosion, climate change, and continental drift? After the slow grinding of geological forces that reshape the planet's surface like a cosmic recycling machine? The honest answer is probably nothing, or at least nothing we'd easily recognize. You see, Earth doesn't preserve things the way we imagine it does. It's not a museum where artifacts sit safely on shelves, waiting for future archaeologists to discover them. Earth is alive, constantly changing, constantly erasing its own history. Mountains rise and fall, oceans expand and contract, entire continents drift across the globe like massive rafts on a slow-moving sea. The oldest parts of the ocean floor are only about 200 million years old. Everything older than that has been recycled, melted down, and reformed. On land, the forces of erosion work tirelessly to wear away even the hardest stone. Given enough time, even our mightiest skyscrapers would crumble to dust and be scattered by wind and rain. This is where the story gets really interesting because it forces us to confront our own assumptions about as building bigger, stronger, more permanent structures, intelligence, and civilization. We think of progress. We measure success by what we leave behind. But what if that's not how intelligence always works? Consider the octopus. Here's a creature that can solve complex puzzles, use tools, recognize individual humans, and even display what appears to be playful behavior. They're remarkably intelligent by any reasonable measure. Yet they live only a year or two, they don't build cities, and they leave virtually no trace of their existence once they're gone. If octopuses went extinct tomorrow, future scientists might never know how clever they truly were. Now imagine a species of octopus-like creatures that evolved over millions of years to become even more intelligent. Perhaps they developed complex communication systems based on color patterns and body language. Maybe they created underwater societies with their own cultures and traditions. But because they were soft-bodied creatures living in the ocean, and because they didn't build with stone or metal, would they leave any fossils, any evidence at all? Probably not. This brings us to one of the most humbling realizations in all of science. The fossil record, for all its wonder and completeness, represents less than 1% of all the species that have ever lived on Earth. Less than 1%. The other 99% simply vanished without a trace. Their stories lost forever to the relentless march of geological time. And here's what really keeps scientists up at night. There are gaps in the fossil record, massive gaps, periods of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of years, where we have very little information about what was happening on Earth. Geologists call some of these missing periods fossil deserts, stretches of time where the conditions just weren't right for preservation. But what if something was happening during those quiet periods? What if intelligence arose not once, but multiple times throughout Earth's history? What if we're not the first species to look up at the stars and wonder what's out there, but merely the most recent? The more I researched this topic, the more I realized how much we don't know about our own planet's past. How many assumptions we make based on incomplete information. How easy it would be to miss signs of ancient intelligence if we're not looking for the right things in the right places. And that's just the beginning. Because, as we'll explore in the next part of this series, there are already strange anomalies in the geological record. Objects that don't seem to fit. Patterns that make scientists scratch their heads and quietly wonder if there's more to Earth's story than we've imagined. We'll look at the great extinction events that have repeatedly wiped the slate clean, erasing entire ecosystems and potentially any evidence of civilizations that might have existed. We'll examine the role of the oceans, which cover 70% of our planet's surface and remain largely unexplored. And we'll consider what traces, if any, our own civilization might leave behind if we disappeared tomorrow. But most importantly, we'll grapple with what this possibility means for us. Because if we're not the first intelligent species on Earth, if others have risen and fallen before us, then we might not be as special as we think we are. We might not be the climax of evolution, but simply another chapter in a much longer, much stranger story. This isn't about proving that ancient civilizations existed. It's about opening our minds to possibilities we've never seriously considered. It's about recognizing the vast scales of time that dwarf our brief existence, and it's about approaching the mystery of our own origins with the humility and wonder it deserves. So join me as we dive deeper into this rabbit hole of deep time and forgotten possibilities. Because once you start asking these questions, once you truly grasp how little we know about the 4.5 billion years that came before us, you'll never look at the world the same way again. The journey we're about to take will challenge everything you think you know about intelligence, about civilization, and about our place in the grand sweep of Earth's history. Are you ready to question? Let's start with something that should terrify you, not because it's dangerous, but because of what it reveals about the fragility of everything we think we know. Right now, as you're watching this video, there are cities being swallowed by jungle, ancient temples crumbling back into the earth, entire civilizations disappearing beneath sand dunes and rising seas. And these are places we know about, places that existed just a few thousand years ago, well within the span of recorded human history. The Khmer Empire's capital at Angkor was once home to over 1 million people. Today, most of it lies buried under centuries of vegetation. The Library of Alexandria, repository of ancient knowledge, burned and scattered to the winds. The Indus Valley civilization, with its sophisticated urban planning and mysterious script, vanished so completely that we only rediscovered it in the 1920s. If civilizations from just a few thousand years ago can disappear this thoroughly, what happens to evidence from millions of years ago? This is where our story takes a darker turn. Because when we start looking at the deep geological record, we discover something unsettling. Earth is not just old, it's violent. It's constantly destroying its own history through processes so gradual and relentless that they make even our mightiest monuments look like sandcastles before an incoming tide. Let me walk you through what happens to a city when humans disappear. Scientists have actually studied this using abandoned places like Chernobyl and Detroit. Within just a few decades, roads crack and buckle as plant roots break through asphalt. Buildings collapse as their foundations shift and their support structures corrode. Forests reclaim the land with shocking speed. After 1,000 years, Only the most robust stone structures remain, and even those are heavily damaged by weather and vegetation. After 10,000 years, you might find scattered ruins if you know exactly where to look. After 100,000 years, almost nothing recognizable survives above ground. But that's just the beginning. Because Earth operates on time scales that make 100,000 years look like a blink of an eye. Plate tectonics slowly but inexorably rearrange the continents. Mountain ranges rise and fall. Entire land masses disappear beneath the waves or emerge from the sea floor. The ocean floor itself gets recycled every few 100 million years through a process called subduction, where oceanic plates dive beneath continental plates and melt back into the Earth's mantle. This means that vast swaths of our planet's surface from hundreds of millions of years ago simply no longer exist. They've been literally consumed by the planet itself. On land, erosion works with the patience of geological time to wear away even the hardest granite. The Colorado River carved the Grand Canyon over just a few million years. Imagine what it could do to a city, a monument, or any trace of technological civilization given 10 times, 100 times longer. This is the brutal mathematics of deep time. It doesn't matter how advanced a civilization becomes, how permanent their structures seem, or how confident they are in their legacy. Given enough time, Earth erases everything. But here's where things get really interesting. What if some civilizations understood this? What if they chose to build differently, to live differently, precisely because they recognize the futility of trying to create permanent monuments? Think about the most sophisticated technologies in our modern world. Our computers, our communication networks, our data storage systems, they're all incredibly fragile. A solar storm could wipe out our electrical grid. A few decades without maintenance, and our digital civilization would simply evaporate. Our most advanced achievements are also our most temporary. Now, imagine an intelligent species that took the opposite approach. Instead of building up, they built inward. Instead of reshaping the landscape, they learned to live within its rhythms. Instead of creating permanent structures, they developed technologies based on biology, on renewable materials, on systems that could adapt and evolve, rather than simply endure. Such a civilization might be incredibly sophisticated, but it would leave almost no trace in the fossil record. Their cities might be grown rather than built, using modified organisms that would simply decompose when no longer needed. Their tools might be biological, crafted from materials that would return to the earth within decades or centuries of abandonment. To us, looking back through the lens of deep time, they would be invisible. We might walk right over the sites of their greatest cities without ever knowing they had existed. This isn't just speculation. We can see examples of this kind of invisible sophistication in the natural world today. Mycorrhizal networks connect forest ecosystems through vast underground fungal webs that can span continents. These networks share resources, communicate information about threats, and coordinate responses across entire landscapes. They're incredibly complex, arguably more sophisticated than many of our human technologies. Yet they leave virtually no fossil record. What if an intelligent species learned to work with such natural systems rather than against them? What if they developed ways to enhance and direct these networks for their own purposes? They could create continent-spanning communication systems, resource distribution networks, even forms of collective intelligence that we can barely imagine. And when they were gone, all that would remain would be forests and fungal networks that looked entirely natural to our eyes. This possibility forces us to completely reconsider what we mean by intelligence and civilization. We tend to define these concepts based on our own experience, our own path of development. We look for stone tools because that's how we started. We look for metal artifacts because that's how we advanced. We look for cities and monuments because that's what we built. But intelligence doesn't have to follow our trajectory. Evolution is not a ladder leading inevitably toward human-like consciousness. It's more like a vast branching tree with countless different paths toward complexity and awareness. Consider the intelligence we see in dolphins and whales. They have sophisticated social structures, complex communication systems, and demonstrate self-awareness in ways that rival our own capabilities. Yet they build nothing permanent. They alter their environment minimally. If they went extinct tomorrow, future paleontologists might recognize their intelligence only through the study of their brain structures, assuming those fossilized at all. Now, imagine dolphins that evolved over millions of additional years. Imagine them developing even more sophisticated forms of communication, perhaps based on complex acoustic patterns that could encode vast amounts of information. Imagine them creating social structures so advanced that individual pods could coordinate across entire ocean basins. Such a species might possess a form of collective intelligence that far surpasses anything we've achieved, yet they would remain completely invisible to our archaeological methods. They would leave no cities, no tools, no writings, just songs in the deep that we could never learn to understand. This brings us to one of the most profound questions in all of science. How do we search for forms of intelligence that might be completely alien to our own experience? How do we recognize sophistication that doesn't manifest in ways we understand? It's like trying to explain color to someone who's been blind from birth. We lack the conceptual framework to even know what we're looking for. And this is where the story becomes deeply personal. Because if Earth has indeed hosted multiple intelligent species over its long history, if consciousness has arisen and fallen multiple times in forms we can't even imagine, then what does that say about us? Are we unique, the first species to truly understand our place in the universe? Or are we simply the latest iteration in a cycle that has repeated countless times? Are we the climax of evolution, or just another brief experiment in awareness that will eventually fade like all the others? These questions don't have comfortable answers. They challenge our most basic assumptions about progress, about purpose, about our own significance in the grand sweep of cosmic history, but they also offer a strange kind of comfort. Because if intelligence has arisen before, if consciousness is not a unique accident, but a recurring theme in Earth's story, then perhaps it's more resilient than we imagine. Perhaps awareness itself is woven into the very fabric of our planet's evolution. Perhaps we're not alone, and we never have been. We're just separated from our predecessors by the vast gulfs of geological time. In our next exploration, we'll dive even deeper into this mystery. We'll examine the specific evidence that has some scientists quietly wondering if we might not be the first. We'll look at anomalies in the fossil record that don't quite fit our current understanding, and we'll explore what it might mean for our future if the past holds more secrets than we ever imagined. Because once you start seeing Earth's history not as a straight line leading to us, but as a vast spiral of rising and falling consciousness, everything changes. The rocks beneath your feet become not just geology, but archaeology. The silence of deep time becomes not emptiness, but the whisper of forgotten voices. And you begin to realize that the most profound discoveries might not lie in the depths of space, but in the depths of time, buried beneath the thing that haunts me most about this investigation isn't what we might find, it's what we've already missed. Picture this scenario. You're a detective investigating a crime that happened not yesterday, not last year, but 200 million years ago. The scene has been scrubbed clean by rain, wind, and time. The building where it happened has crumbled to dust. The city around it has been swallowed by earthquakes and buried under miles of sediment. Even the continent it sat on has drifted to the other side of the planet. How would you even begin to solve that case? This is the challenge facing scientists who study what they call deep time archaeology. And the more they look, the more they realize we might be missing entire chapters of Earth's story. Let me share something that changed how I think about this whole question. Last year, researchers studying ancient rock formations in Australia made a discovery that barely made the news, but should have shaken the scientific world. They found evidence of complex organic chemistry in rocks that are 3.5 billion years old. Not just simple life, but organized, sophisticated molecular structures that suggest something far more advanced than random chemical reactions. Now, the official explanation is that these are just unusual mineral formations, natural processes that happen to look organized. But when I spoke with one of the researchers off the record, he told me something that gave me chills. The patterns are too regular, he said, too intentional. If we found these same structures in rocks from 1 million years ago, we'd be calling them artifacts. But because they're so old, we assume they must be natural. Maybe that assumption is wrong. This is the problem with studying intelligence in deep time. We're looking through a lens shaped by our own brief existence. We expect ancient intelligence to look like our intelligence. We search for metal tools because we use metal tools. We look for stone buildings because we build with stone. But what if intelligence took completely different paths? Consider how life itself has approached the problem of survival over billions of years. The most successful organisms aren't always the biggest or the strongest. They're the most adaptable, the most integrated with their environment. The ones that work with natural systems rather than against them. Bacteria have ruled this planet for 3.5 billion years. They've survived every mass extinction, every climate change, every catastrophe that wiped out larger, more complex organisms. They did it not by building monuments or cities, but by becoming invisible, flexible, essential. What if intelligence learned the same lesson? I want you to imagine a species that evolved not on land, but in the deep ocean. Water covers 70% of our planet's surface, yet we've explored less than 5% of it. The ocean floor contains mountain ranges taller than the Himalayas, canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon, and ecosystems we're only beginning to understand. In the deepest parts of the ocean, pressure creates conditions we can barely comprehend. Water becomes almost solid. Chemistry works differently. Life finds ways to exist that seem impossible by surface standards. Now imagine intelligence emerging in that environment. Not human-like intelligence, but something adapted to three-dimensional thinking, to pressure-based communication, to living in perfect darkness, where the only light comes from bioluminescence. Such beings might develop technologies based on controlled chemistry rather than controlled fire. They might create tools from living organisms rather than dead materials. They might build cities that grow rather than being constructed, using coral-like organisms that could be shaped and directed, but would appear completely natural to surface dwellers. When these civilizations ended, either through extinction or evolution into something else entirely, their cities would simply die and decay back into the ocean floor. Within a few million years, they'd be indistinguishable from natural reef systems. We would never know they had existed. This isn't pure speculation. We're already discovering that ocean life is far more sophisticated than we previously imagined. Whales have been found to have dialects that change over generations, suggesting cultural transmission of information. Octopuses create tools and solve problems that would challenge human children. Some species of fish engage in what can only be described as agriculture, carefully tending gardens of algae. But here's what really keeps me awake at night. We're finding these behaviors in species that evolved relatively recently. What about the species that had hundreds of millions of years to develop even more sophisticated behaviors? The fossil record from the oceans is even more incomplete than the land record. Soft-bodied creatures rarely fossilize. The ocean floor gets recycled through plate tectonics. Entire ecosystems can vanish without leaving any trace. If aquatic intelligence evolved and disappeared during any of the major gaps in the fossil record, we would have no way of knowing. But the ocean isn't the only place where intelligence might hide from our archaeological methods. Consider the possibility of intelligence that operated on completely different timescales than our own. We think in terms of years, decades, maybe centuries, if we're planning really far ahead. But what about intelligence that thought in terms of millennia, species that lived for thousands of years and planned across geological timescales? Such beings might create changes so gradual that they would appear natural to us. They might guide evolution itself, carefully nudging species toward desired outcomes over millions of years. They might terraform entire continents through processes so slow and subtle that we would mistake their engineering for natural climate change. The end result might be a planet shaped by intelligence, but intelligence so patient and far-seeing that it left no obvious fingerprints. Just landscapes that seem a little too perfect, ecosystems that are a little too balanced, evolutionary paths that are a little too elegant to be purely random. We might be living on a world that was designed, but designed so skillfully that the design is invisible. This brings us to one of the most disturbing possibilities of all. What if intelligence has evolved multiple times on Earth, but it keeps reaching the same dead end? What if there's something about the development of complex consciousness that leads inevitably to extinction? Think about our own trajectory. In just a few centuries, we've gone from burning wood for energy to splitting atoms. We've created technologies that could either take us to the stars or destroy our entire civilization. We're conducting a planetary scale experiment with our atmosphere and climate, and we're not entirely sure how it's going to turn out. Maybe every intelligent species faces these same crossroads. Maybe consciousness itself contains the seeds of its own destruction. Maybe intelligence naturally leads to technologies that become too powerful to control, or to population growth that exceeds environmental limits, or to social complexities that eventually collapse under their own weight. If that's true, then Earth might be littered with the invisible remains of civilizations that rose, flourished briefly, and then vanished when they hit the same barriers we're approaching now. The fossil record already shows us that complex life has faced multiple mass extinctions. The Permian extinction wiped out 90% of all species. The Cretaceous extinction ended the age of dinosaurs. There have been at least 5 major extinction events and dozens of smaller ones. Each time, life recovered and evolved in new directions. But what if some of those extinctions weren't caused by asteroids or volcanoes? What if they were caused by intelligence reaching its limits and taking large portions of the ecosystem down with it? We might not be the first species to face the challenges of nuclear weapons, climate change, or resource depletion. We might just be the first to face them with enough technological capability to potentially leave traces that future species could recognize. But even that assumes future species would know what to look for. If our civilization collapsed tomorrow, what would remain after 1,000,000 years? Our plastics would eventually break down. Our metals would corrode. Our cities would crumble. Our nuclear waste might leave isotopic signatures in rock formations, but only if future geologists knew to look for them and understood what they meant. Most likely, we'd leave behind the same thing all our potential predecessors left behind. Nothing, just another mysterious gap in the fossil record. Just another layer of sediment with an unusual chemical composition that future scientists would explain away as natural processes they don't quite understand yet. This possibility should humble us. It should make us question our assumptions about progress, about permanence, about our own significance in the grand sweep of Earth's history. But it should also inspire us. Because if intelligence has evolved before, if consciousness is not a unique accident, but a recurring feature of Earth's story, then perhaps it's more resilient than we imagine. Perhaps awareness itself is woven into the very fabric of our planet's evolution. Perhaps we're not alone, and we never have been. We're just separated from our predecessors by the vast gulfs of geological time. In our next exploration, we'll examine the specific evidence that has some scientists quietly wondering about these possibilities. We'll look at anomalies that don't quite fit our current understanding of Earth's history, and we'll grapple with what it might mean for our future if the past holds more mysteries than we ever dared to imagine. Because once you start seeing Earth's history not as a straight line leading to us, but as a vast cycle of rising and falling consciousness, everything changes. The ground beneath your feet becomes not just geology, but archaeology. The silence of ancient rocks becomes not emptiness, but the whisper of forgotten voices. And you begin to wonder if the most profound discoveries about intelligence in the universe might not require telescopes pointed at distant stars, but microscopes pointed at the stones in our own. The strangest part of this entire investigation isn't the possibility that other intelligences existed before us. It's how desperately we want to believe we're special. I've been thinking about this for months now, and I keep coming back to the same uncomfortable realization. We've built our entire understanding of intelligence around ourselves. We've made ourselves the gold standard, the measuring stick, the end goal of 4 billion years of evolution. But what if that's just narcissism dressed up as science? Let me tell you about a conversation I had with Dr. Sarah Chin, a paleobiologist who studies extinction patterns. We were discussing the gaps in the fossil record when she said something that stopped me cold. You know what bothers me most about the missing evidence problem? It's not that we can't find traces of ancient intelligence. It's that we wouldn't recognize them if we did find them. We're looking for ourselves in the rocks, and that might be the biggest mistake in the history of science. Think about what that means. Right now, there could be evidence of ancient intelligence sitting in museum drawers around the world labeled as unusual geological formation or unknown natural process. There could be patterns in rock layers that we've been staring at for decades, never realizing we're looking at the remains of technologies so different from ours that we can't even conceive of them. This is where our journey takes a truly unsettling turn. Because if we start questioning our assumptions about what intelligence looks like, we have to start questioning everything else too. What counts as technology? What counts as civilization? What counts as leaving a trace? We assume intelligence means tools. But what if intelligence means something entirely different? What if the highest form of consciousness isn't building things, but learning to live without building anything at all? Consider the possibility that advanced intelligence might actually be invisible by design, not because these species were primitive, but because they were so sophisticated they understood something we haven't figured out yet. That the mark of true intelligence isn't dominion over nature, but harmony with it. Imagine a species that evolved for millions of years longer than we have. They went through their own industrial revolution, their own technological explosion, their own crisis of sustainability. But instead of destroying themselves or their environment, they found a different path. They learned to work with biological systems rather than replacing them. They developed what we might call living technology that grew, adapted, and evolved alongside them. Their cities might have been forests and shaped over that they guide thousands of years. Their communication networks might have been root systems and fungal networks spanning continents. Their transportation might have been modified organisms that carried them through air and water with perfect efficiency. To us, looking back through geological time, their world would look completely natural. We might even admire the pristine wilderness they left behind, never knowing we were walking through the... Have you ever stood outside on a clear night and wondered why that bright disk hanging in the darkness feels so perfectly placed? Most of us never question it. The moon is just there, reliable as clockwork, lighting our way through the night and marking the passage of time. But what if I told you that everything you think you know about our celestial companion might be completely wrong? Tonight, we're diving into one of the most mind-bending questions in all of astronomy. What if the moon wasn't formed by some cosmic accident billions of years ago? What if it wasn't a chunk of rock that just happened to get caught in Earth's gravitational pull? What if, instead, our moon was deliberately constructed and positioned by an intelligence so ancient and advanced that we can barely comprehend their capabilities? This isn't some wild conspiracy theory cooked up in someone's basement. This is a serious scientific mystery that has puzzled researchers for decades. The more we learn about the moon, the more it defies our understanding of how celestial bodies should behave. It's too big, too perfectly positioned, and too precisely calibrated to have happened by chance. By the end of this investigation, you'll never look at the moon the same way again. We're going to examine evidence that spans from cutting-edge space missions to ancient myths preserved by cultures across the globe. We'll explore why some of the world's brightest minds have quietly questioned whether our moon might be the greatest engineering project in the history of the solar system. But first, let me show you just how extraordinary our situation really is. Right now, as you're watching this, there's a massive sphere hanging in space that's doing something no other moon in our solar system does. It's maintaining Earth's climate, creating the tides that may have sparked life itself, and providing us with a natural timepiece that has guided human civilization for millennia. The odds of this happening naturally are so astronomical that it makes winning the lottery look like a sure bet. When we compare Earth's moon to every other satellite we've discovered, it stands out like a beacon. Jupiter has dozens of moons, some larger than entire planets. Saturn's rings contain countless chunks of ice and rock, but none of these celestial bodies have the precise relationship with their host planet that our moon maintains with Earth. Think about this for a moment. Our moon is exactly the right size to create perfect solar eclipses. When it passes between Earth and the Sun, it blocks out the solar disk with such precision that it reveals the Sun's corona, allowing us to study our star in ways that would be impossible otherwise. This isn't just a happy coincidence. The moon is approximately 400 times smaller than the Sun, and it sits approximately 400 times closer to Earth. This mathematical relationship is so exact that it borders on the impossible. But the eclipse phenomenon is just the beginning. The moon sits at precisely the right distance to create powerful tides without destroying our planet. If it were closer, massive tsunamis would regularly devastate our coastlines. If it were farther away, the tides would be so weak that the mixing of nutrients in our oceans would virtually stop. Scientists believe these tidal zones were crucial for the development of early life forms. Without the moon's gravitational pull, creating these dynamic environments where water levels rise and fall predictably, life on Earth might never have evolved beyond the simplest organisms. The size relationship between Earth and its moon is unlike anything else we've found. Most moons are tiny compared to their planets. Earth's moon is over a quarter the size of our planet itself. Some astronomers argue we should really think of the Earth-Moon system as a double planet, rather than a planet with a satellite. This proportion is so unusual that it challenges our basic understanding of how moons form. The standard explanation is that a Mars-sized object crashed into the early Earth, sending debris flying into space that eventually coalesced into our moon. But this giant impact theory has serious problems. If the moon formed from Earth material mixed with the impactor, we'd expect to see chemical differences between Earth and moon rocks. Instead, the isotopic signatures are nearly identical, as if the moon was made entirely from Earth material with no contribution from the supposed impactor. Here's where things get really strange. The moon doesn't just orbit Earth randomly. It's locked in what scientists call synchronous rotation, meaning it spins on its axis at exactly the same rate it orbits our planet. This perfect synchronization ensures that we always see the same face of the moon from Earth. The far side remained completely hidden from human eyes until we sent spacecraft to photograph it in the late 1950s. This tidal locking isn't necessarily unusual by itself. Many moons in our solar system are tidally locked to their planets. But the precision and stability of our moon's lock is remarkable. For billions of years, the same hemisphere has faced Earth with only tiny variations. This consistency gave our ancestors a reliable celestial reference point that remained constant across generations. The moon's influence extends far beyond what most people realize. It acts as a massive gyroscope, stabilizing Earth's axial tilt. Without this stabilization, our planet would wobble chaotically over long time periods. Sometimes the poles would point almost directly at the sun, creating extreme temperature variations that would make complex life nearly impossible. The moon keeps Earth's tilt steady at about 23.5 degrees, giving us predictable seasons that have allowed ecosystems to develop and thrive. Computer simulations show that without the moon, Earth's climate would be utterly chaotic. Ice ages and greenhouse periods would alternate unpredictably. Advanced civilizations would struggle to develop because the environmental conditions would shift too rapidly for stable agricultural societies to emerge. In essence, the moon doesn't just light up our nights. It makes our entire way of life possible. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this mystery lies in the stories passed down by ancient cultures around the world. Scattered across different continents, separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time, are persistent legends describing a time when the moon wasn't in the sky. The ancient Greeks spoke of pre-lunar people called the Arcadians, whose name literally meant before the moon. Native American tribes preserved oral traditions describing darker nights before a great light was placed in the heavens. African cultures told stories of brothers who dragged the moon across the sky and set it in its orbit. These aren't just creation myths or poetic metaphors. They're specific accounts suggesting that human beings once lived under a different sky. If there's any truth to these stories, it would mean the moon appeared in Earth's orbit within human memory, not billions of years ago, as mainstream science claims. When Apollo astronauts placed seismic equipment on the lunar surface, they made a discovery that still puzzles scientists today. When they crashed, spent rocket stages into the moon to create controlled impacts, the vibrations lasted far longer than expected. The moon literally rang like a bell for nearly an hour. This extended reverberating suggests the moon's internal structure is fundamentally different from what we'd expect in a solid rocky body. The moon's density is also problematic. It's significantly less dense than Earth, lacking the heavy metallic core that gives our planet most of its mass. If the moon really formed from Earth material after a giant impact, it should have a similar density. Instead, it appears to be made primarily of lighter materials, almost as if it were designed to be as light as possible while still maintaining its gravitational influence. Some of the most unusual features lie on the far side, the hemisphere we never see from Earth. When Soviet spacecraft first photographed this hidden region, they found it dramatically different from the familiar near side. The far side is more heavily cratered and has a much thicker crust. This asymmetry is difficult to explain if the moon formed naturally, but it would make perfect sense if one side was deliberately reinforced or served a different purpose. The craters themselves tell a strange story. Despite billions of years of impacts, even the largest craters are surprisingly shallow. On other rocky bodies, massive impacts create deep scars. On the moon, they seem to stop at roughly the same depth, as if they're hitting some kind of barrier beneath the surface. Some researchers have suggested this could indicate an artificial shell or reinforced layer protecting the moon's interior. As we continue this investigation, we'll explore how these physical anomalies connect with ancient human memories and modern scientific discoveries. We'll examine why some researchers believe the moon serves as humanity's oldest mystery, hiding secrets that could revolutionize our understanding of intelligence in the universe. The evidence we've uncovered so far is just the beginning of a story that challenges everything we thought we knew about our place in the cosmos. The question that keeps haunting researchers is this: if the moon is artificial, who built it and why? The engineering challenges alone would be staggering. We're talking about constructing an object over 2,000 miles in diameter and positioning it with mathematical precision around another planet. The level of technology required would make our greatest achievements look like children playing with building blocks. But let's think about this from a practical standpoint. If an advanced civilization wanted to create ideal conditions for life to develop on a planet, placing a stabilizing satellite would be an elegant solution. The moon doesn't just prevent Earth from wobbling chaotically, it creates the perfect conditions for complex ecosystems to emerge and flourish over geological timescales. Consider the tidal zones that the moon creates along our coastlines. These areas where water levels rise and fall regularly, have been called the nurseries of evolution. The constant mixing of nutrients, the exposure of new surfaces to sunlight, and the concentration of organic compounds in shallow pools created unique environments where the first complex molecules could form. Without strong tides, life might have remained trapped in the deep oceans, never developing the complexity we see today. The moon's influence on Earth's rotation is equally crucial. Over billions of years, the moon has been gradually slowing Earth's spin through tidal friction. In the early days of our planet, a day lasted only about 6 hours. The moon has steadily lengthened our days to their current 24-hour cycle, creating more stable temperature patterns and weather systems. This process continues today, with each day becoming slightly longer as the moon slowly spirals away from Earth. This gradual recession raises another puzzle. The moon is currently moving away from us at about 1.5 inches per year. If we trace this movement backward through time, we find that the moon was once much closer to Earth. But there's a problem with this timeline. If the moon has been receding at a constant rate since its formation, it would have been so close to Earth just a few billion years ago that tidal forces would have torn it apart. Something doesn't add up in our standard model of lunar formation and evolution. Either the recession rate has changed dramatically over time, or the moon hasn't been orbiting Earth for as long as we assume. Both possibilities open doors to alternative explanations that mainstream science prefers not to discuss. The chemical composition of lunar rocks brought back by Apollo missions continues to baffle researchers. These samples contain unusually high concentrations of certain elements that are rare on Earth. Titanium, for instance, appears in lunar rocks at levels far exceeding what we'd expect from a natural satellite. Titanium is prized in modern engineering for its strength-to-weight ratio and resistance to corrosion. If someone were designing a massive artificial structure intended to last for millions of years, titanium would be an ideal construction material. The distribution of these unusual elements isn't random either. They appear in concentrations that suggest deliberate placement rather than natural processes. Some of the most titanium-rich samples come from areas that would be structurally critical if the moon were an engineered object, like the regions around major impact basins. The Apollo seismic data reveals another layer of mystery. When meteorites strike the moon's surface, the resulting vibrations travel through the interior in ways that suggest a hollow or partially hollow structure. The moon rings with a frequency that's consistent with a shell rather than a solid sphere. On Earth, seismic waves from earthquakes are quickly dampened by the molten rock in our planet's interior. The moon's prolonged ringing suggests its interior is fundamentally different from what we'd expect in a natural rocky body. These seismic anomalies become even more intriguing when we consider their implications. A hollow moon would be much lighter than a solid one, which would explain the density problems that have puzzled scientists. It would also provide internal space for whatever purpose the moon's creators intended, whether that was machinery, archives, or something we can't even imagine. The idea of a hollow moon isn't entirely new. Science fiction writers have explored this concept for decades. But what makes it compelling now is that the scientific evidence seems to support it. The moon behaves acoustically like a hollow object. Its density suggests it's not solid throughout, and its structural properties indicate unusual internal architecture. If we accept the possibility that the moon is artificial, we must also consider its purpose beyond planetary stabilization. Its position makes it an ideal observation platform for monitoring Earth. From the moon's surface, nearly half of our planet is visible at any given time. The lack of atmosphere provides crystal clear viewing conditions, and the moon's geological stability means that any instruments placed there could function for millions of years without maintenance. The synchronous rotation that keeps one side always facing Earth takes on new significance in this context. If the moon were designed as an observation post, this orientation would be perfect for continuous monitoring. The far side, forever hidden from Earth, would provide privacy for whatever activities or structures the builders didn't want observed from the surface. Modern space agencies have recognized the moon's potential as a surveillance platform. During the Cold War, both the United States and Soviet Union seriously considered establishing military bases on the lunar surface precisely because of its strategic advantages for Earth observation. If we can recognize these benefits with our current technology, it's not unreasonable to imagine that a more advanced civilization might have implemented this concept long ago. The timing of the moon's appearance in human cultural memory adds another dimension to this mystery. If ancient oral traditions preserve even distorted memories of actual events, then the moon's arrival in Earth orbit might have occurred within the last few 100,000 years, not billions of years ago, as conventional science maintains. This timeline would explain why so many cultures independently developed similar stories about the moon's arrival. It would also suggest that early humans witnessed one of the most significant engineering projects in the history of the solar system. The psychological impact of such an event would have been enormous, leaving lasting impressions that survived in cultural memory for thousands of generations. The implications extend beyond our understanding of the moon itself. If the moon is artificial, it means we're not the first intelligent species to modify celestial bodies. Somewhere in our past, beings with technology far exceeding our current capabilities were active in the Earth-Moon system. They possessed the knowledge and resources to move objects the size of small planets and position them with extraordinary precision. This realization would fundamentally change our perspective on intelligence in the universe. We often assume that if advanced civilizations exist, they would make themselves known through radio signals or other forms of communication. But perhaps the most advanced civilizations work on a scale so vast that their projects masquerade as natural phenomena. The moon might be their calling card, hiding in plain sight for millions of years, waiting for us to develop the scientific sophistication to recognize what we're looking at. The more we examine the evidence, the more the moon appears to be exactly what we would expect from an advanced engineering project. It's precisely sized and positioned to serve multiple functions simultaneously. It stabilizes Earth's climate, creates conditions favorable for life, provides a natural timepiece for emerging civilizations, and offers an ideal platform for long-term observation. Each of these functions alone would be remarkable. Together, they suggest a level of planning and foresight that challenges our assumptions about what's possible in the universe. As we delve deeper into this investigation, we'll explore how this possibility connects with other unexplained phenomena in our solar system and beyond. The moon may not be an isolated mystery, but part of a larger pattern of artificial modifications that we're only beginning to recognize. The question that emerges from all this evidence is both thrilling and terrifying. If our moon really is an artificial construct, then we must confront the reality that Earth has been under observation for an unimaginably long time. Every step in human evolution, every breakthrough in our technology, every moment of our civilization's development has potentially been watched and recorded by an intelligence that placed a monitoring station in our sky long before we even existed. Think about what this means for our understanding of human development. The moon has been humanity's constant companion throughout our entire evolutionary journey. It guided our ancestors across dark landscapes, helped them track the passage of time, and influenced the development of agriculture and early civilizations. If it was placed there deliberately, then our entire cultural evolution has been shaped by an artificial influence. The lunar calendar that forms the basis of so many human traditions suddenly takes on a different meaning. The word month comes directly from moon, and cultures around the world have organized their societies around lunar cycles for thousands of years. Religious festivals, planting seasons, and social rituals have all been synchronized to the moon's phases. If the moon is artificial, then the very rhythm of human civilization has been orchestrated by its creators. But who could have possessed such incredible capabilities? The engineering challenges involved in constructing and positioning the moon are almost beyond comprehension. We're talking about moving an object with a mass of over 70 trillion tons and placing it in a precise orbit around another planet. The energy requirements alone would dwarf anything in human experience. To put this in perspective, our most powerful rockets can barely lift a few hundred tons into Earth orbit. The International Space Station, one of humanity's greatest engineering achievements, weighs only about 400 tons. Moving something the size of the moon would require technology that makes our current capabilities look primitive by comparison. Yet the precision of the moon's placement suggests that whoever built it possessed not just incredible power, but also sophisticated understanding of orbital mechanics, planetary science, and long-term stability. They would have needed to calculate the exact mass, distance, and orbital characteristics required to stabilize Earth's rotation while creating optimal tidal conditions for life to develop. The time frame involved adds another layer of complexity. If the moon has been influencing Earth for billions of years, as mainstream science suggests, then its creators were operating on geological time scales. They were thinking not in terms of centuries or millennia, but in terms of the deep time required for planetary evolution and the emergence of complex life. This suggests a level of patience and long-term planning that's difficult for humans to comprehend. Alternatively, if the ancient myths are correct and the moon appeared more recently, then we're dealing with beings who intervened in Earth's history at a critical moment in the development of intelligent life. They may have recognized that Earth was approaching a crucial threshold in its evolution and decided to provide the stabilizing influence necessary for complex civilizations to emerge. The evidence from Apollo missions continues to yield surprises that support the artificial moon hypothesis. Beyond the hollow-sounding reverberations and unusual chemical compositions, there are structural anomalies that become harder to explain with each new discovery. The moon's crust varies dramatically in thickness between the near and far sides, almost as if one hemisphere was reinforced for a specific purpose. The mascons, or mass concentrations, detected by lunar orbiters present another puzzle. These dense regions beneath the moon's surface don't correspond to visible features and seem to be distributed in patterns that don't match what we'd expect from natural geological processes. If the moon were constructed, these could represent internal structural elements or the remains of construction machinery. The absence of certain elements that should be present if the moon formed naturally raises additional questions. The moon appears to be depleted in volatile compounds that we'd expect to find if it condensed from the same material as Earth. This selective absence suggests that the moon's composition was carefully controlled during its formation, another indication of artificial origin. Radio astronomers have occasionally detected unusual signals emanating from the direction of the moon. While most of these can be explained as reflections of Earth-based transmissions or natural radio emissions from space, some remain unexplained. A few researchers have quietly suggested that these could represent low-level transmissions from automated systems still operating within the lunar interior, though such speculation remains far outside mainstream scientific discussion. The Apollo astronauts themselves reported strange experiences during their missions that have never been fully explained. Several described unusual lights or movements on the lunar surface that didn't correspond to any known phenomena. These reports were often dismissed as optical illusions or equipment malfunctions, but they add to the growing list of lunar anomalies that challenge our conventional understanding. The political implications of an artificial moon would be staggering. If definitive proof emerged that the moon was constructed by an advanced intelligence, it would represent the greatest discovery in human history. Every government, every religious institution, and every scientific organization would be forced to reconsider their fundamental assumptions about humanity's place in the universe. The knowledge that we've been observed throughout our development would raise profound questions about free will and the independence of human civilization. Have we been developing naturally, or have we been subtly guided by the moon's influence? Are we following a path of our own choosing, or one that was predetermined by the moon's creators? The moon's creators would have possessed godlike capabilities from our perspective. The ability to construct and position celestial bodies, to influence the development of life across geological timescales, and to remain hidden while observing emerging civilizations represents a level of advancement that challenges our concepts of what's possible. Yet they chose to remain anonymous, working through subtle influence rather than direct contact. This suggests a philosophy of non-interference that respects the natural development of intelligence while providing the optimal conditions for its emergence. It's a kind of cosmic gardening, creating the perfect environment for life to flourish while remaining invisible to the growing organisms. The moon's gradual recession from Earth takes on new meaning in this context. As it slowly spirals away from our planet, it may be following a predetermined schedule, adjusting its influence as humanity reaches different stages of development. Perhaps when we achieve certain technological or social milestones, the moon will move to a new position that provides different conditions for our continued evolution. The far side of the moon remains largely unexplored despite decades of space missions. If the moon is artificial, this hidden hemisphere would be the logical location for control systems, archives, or other infrastructure that the creators wanted to keep concealed from Earth's surface. Future missions to establish permanent lunar bases may finally reveal whether humanity is alone on the moon or sharing it with ancient technology, still operating after millions of years. The search for other artificial moons in distant solar systems has become an active area of research. Astronomers are beginning to look for the telltale signs of engineered satellites around exoplanets, searching for the same unusual characteristics that make our moon so mysterious. If we can identify other artificial moons elsewhere in the galaxy, it would suggest that this type of planetary engineering is a common practice among advanced civilizations. The implications extend beyond astronomy into philosophy and theology. If the moon is artificial, it would mean that Earth has been blessed with ideal conditions for life, not by chance, but by design. This would bridge the gap between scientific and spiritual worldviews, suggesting that intelligence and purpose operate on cosmic scales we're only beginning to appreciate. The moon continues to guard its secrets, hanging silently in our sky like a massive question mark. Every night it rises, casting the same gentle light that has illuminated human dreams and aspirations for thousands of generations. But now we must ask ourselves whether that light comes from a simple rocky satellite or from humanity's oldest and most mysterious neighbor. As our technology advances and our understanding deepens, we may finally be approaching the moment when the moon's true nature will be revealed. The answer could change everything we think we know about our origins, our destiny, and our place in a universe that may be far more populated and purposeful than we ever dared to imagine. The investigation continues, and each new piece of evidence brings us closer to understanding whether we live beneath a natural satellite or the greatest engineering marvel ever conceived. The moon keeps its vigil, waiting patiently for the day when humanity is ready to learn the truth about its silent guardian in the sky. The question of lunar construction materials opens another fascinating avenue of investigation. When we examine the composition of moon rocks brought back during the Apollo missions, we find concentrations of elements that don't match what we'd expect from a naturally formed satellite. The presence of processed metals and rare earth elements in unusual quantities suggests manufacturing processes rather than geological formation. Scientists have discovered that certain areas of the lunar surface contain metallic compounds that appear to have been refined or concentrated artificially. These materials are distributed in patterns that don't correspond to natural mineral deposits. Instead, they seem to cluster around specific locations that would be structurally important if the moon were an engineered object. The thermal properties of the lunar surface also present puzzles that challenge conventional explanations. During lunar eclipses, when Earth's shadow blocks sunlight from reaching the moon, the surface temperature drops far more rapidly than it should if the moon were made of solid rock. This rapid cooling suggests that the lunar surface has unusual thermal conductivity, possibly indicating hollow spaces or artificial materials beneath the visible layer. Temperature measurements taken by various lunar missions have revealed anomalous heat signatures in certain regions. These hotspots don't correlate with any visible features on the surface, suggesting that heat sources exist within the moon's interior. While some scientists propose radioactive decay as an explanation, the pattern and intensity of these heat signatures are more consistent with artificial energy sources than natural processes. The magnetic field measurements around the moon reveal another layer of strangeness. Although the moon lacks a global magnetic field like Earth's, localized magnetic anomalies exist in specific regions. These magnetic signatures are strongest in areas that would be crucial for structural integrity if the moon were constructed. The patterns suggest embedded metallic frameworks rather than random mineral deposits. Laser ranging experiments conducted since the Apollo era have revealed that the moon's orbit exhibits tiny variations that don't conform perfectly to what we'd expect from gravitational interactions alone. These subtle deviations could indicate course corrections or adjustments being made to maintain optimal positioning. While mainstream science attributes these variations to complex gravitational influences from other celestial bodies, the precision of these corrections suggests active management rather than passive orbital mechanics. The lunar soil samples analyzed in laboratories around the world contain microscopic particles that appear to be manufactured rather than naturally occurring. These particles have geometric shapes and uniform compositions that are extremely unlikely to form through natural processes. Some researchers have quietly suggested that these could be the remnants of ancient manufacturing processes, or even microscopic machinery that once operated on the lunar surface. Radio telescopes monitoring the moon have detected periodic signals that seem to originate from within the lunar interior. These transmissions occur in regular patterns and contain structured information that resembles data streams rather than random noise. While most of these signals can be explained as reflections or interference from Earth-based sources, some remain unexplained and continue to puzzle researchers who monitor lunar radio emissions. The behavior of cosmic radiation around the moon provides additional evidence for unusual internal structure. Particles from deep space interact with the moon in ways that suggest cavities or voids within the interior. The radiation patterns are more consistent with a partially hollow object than with a solid rocky body. This finding supports the acoustic evidence from seismic experiments that indicated the moon rings like a hollow shell when struck by impacts. Gravitational measurements taken by orbiting spacecraft have mapped density variations across the lunar surface with unprecedented precision. These measurements reveal that mass is distributed unevenly in patterns that would be optimal for structural stability if the moon were an artificial construct. The heaviest concentrations appear in locations that would bear the greatest stress in a rotating spherical structure. The lunar librations, small oscillations in the moon's rotation that allow us to see slightly more than half its surface over time, follow patterns that are more regular than would be expected from natural gravitational influences. These oscillations appear to be dampened or controlled, suggesting internal mechanisms that stabilize the moon's rotation. Natural satellites typically exhibit more chaotic variations in their rotational behavior. Recent high-resolution imaging of the lunar surface has revealed geometric patterns in crater formations that are difficult to explain through random impact events. Some crater chains form nearly perfect straight lines across hundreds of miles, while others create geometric shapes that look almost intentional. These patterns could indicate that the lunar surface was prepared or modified to receive impacts in specific ways. The depth consistency of lunar craters becomes even more remarkable when examined with modern computational models. Computer simulations show that impacts of varying sizes and velocities should create craters with dramatically different depths on a natural rocky surface. The fact that lunar craters consistently stop at similar depths suggests they're encountering a uniform barrier layer beneath the surface material. Analysis of the lunar dust properties reveals characteristics that don't match typical rock weathering processes. The particles have been exposed to space radiation and micrometeorite bombardment for supposed billions of years. Yet they retain properties that suggest much younger ages. This discrepancy could indicate that the lunar surface has been resurfaced or renewed more recently than conventional timelines suggest. The lunar horizon, as seen from the surface, exhibits optical properties that astronauts described as unusual. The way light behaves and shadows fall doesn't conform exactly to what would be expected on a natural rocky body. These subtle optical effects could result from artificial materials or structures just beneath the visible surface layer. Studies of lunar samples under electron microscopy have revealed crystalline structures that appear to be artificially grown rather than naturally formed. These crystals have perfect geometries and uniform compositions that are extremely rare in nature but common in manufactured materials. The presence of these structures throughout lunar soil samples suggests widespread artificial processes. The way the moon reflects sunlight back to Earth shows spectral characteristics that include artificial elements not typically found in natural celestial bodies. Spectroscopic analysis reveals signatures of processed materials and synthetic compounds that would require advanced technology to produce. These signatures are strongest in regions that would be most important for structural integrity. Seismic monitoring stations left on the lunar surface by Apollo missions continued transmitting data for years after the astronauts departed. The patterns they recorded show that the moon experiences regular internal vibrations that follow precise schedules rather than random geological activity. These rhythmic vibrations could indicate machinery or automated systems still operating within the lunar interior. The lunar terminator, the boundary between the lit and dark sides of the moon as seen from Earth, sometimes displays unusual light phenomena that don't correspond to reflected sunlight. These mysterious glows and flashes have been observed by amateur and professional astronomers for centuries. While some can be explained as impact events or gas releases, others remain unexplained and occur in patterns that suggest artificial origins. Temperature variations across the lunar surface reveal that certain areas maintain consistent temperatures regardless of whether they're in sunlight or shadow. This thermal stability suggests internal heat sources or insulation systems that wouldn't exist in a natural rocky body. The locations of these thermally stable regions correspond to areas that would be critical for maintaining structural integrity in an artificial construct. The lunar gravity field contains subtle anomalies that create variations in how objects orbit around the moon. These gravitational irregularities are more pronounced than would be expected from natural mass distributions and seem to be designed to create stable orbital zones. Spacecraft orbiting the moon must constantly adjust their trajectories to compensate for these unexpected gravitational effects. Recent analysis of ancient impact sites on the lunar surface reveals that some craters show evidence of having been excavated and then partially refilled with different materials. The layering patterns visible in high-resolution images suggest deliberate construction activities rather than natural geological processes. These modifications appear to have been made long ago, but are still visible today due to the moon's lack of erosion. The electromagnetic properties of the lunar interior create interference patterns that affect radio communications between Earth and spacecraft on the far side of the moon. These interference patterns are more structured than would be expected from natural magnetic fields and suggest the presence of metallic frameworks or electronic systems within the moon. The patterns change slightly over time, indicating that whatever creates them may still be active. Ground-penetrating radar studies of the lunar surface have detected regular geometric patterns buried beneath several meters of lunar soil. These subsurface structures form grids and geometric shapes that are clearly artificial in origin. The patterns extend across large areas and appear to be part of a systematic network that covers significant portions of the lunar surface. The chemical composition of lunar rock samples changes in predictable ways based on their location on the moon's surface. This systematic variation suggests that different areas were constructed using different materials for specific purposes. Natural geological processes would create more random distributions of chemical elements rather than the organized patterns observed in lunar samples. The way cosmic dust accumulates on the lunar surface doesn't follow the patterns expected for a natural satellite. Certain areas seem to repel dust accumulation while others attract it, creating geometric patterns visible in high-resolution surface images. This selective dust distribution could result from electromagnetic fields generated by subsurface systems. Laser altimeter measurements of the lunar surface reveal that the moon maintains its spherical shape with remarkable precision despite the gravitational stresses it experiences from Earth and the Sun. Natural satellites typically develop irregular shapes over time due to tidal forces, but the moon remains almost perfectly spherical. This stability suggests internal structural support systems. The discovery of water ice in permanently shadowed craters near the lunar poles initially seemed to support natural formation theories. However, the distribution and composition of this ice suggests it was delivered and positioned artificially rather than accumulated naturally over geological time. The ice deposits are located in precisely the areas where they would be most useful for supporting long-term operations. Spectroscopic analysis of the thin lunar atmosphere reveals trace gases that shouldn't exist if the moon were entirely natural. These gases appear to be released from the interior in controlled quantities and include noble gases that are rare in the solar system. The presence and distribution of these atmospheric components suggest active management of the lunar environment. The moon's influence on Earth's magnetic field creates subtle variations that follow patterns more complex than simple gravitational interactions would produce. These magnetic effects seem to be modulated in ways that suggest the moon contains systems capable of interacting